This is episode 6 of the Intellectual Work podcast, and we're almost finishing my field manual on the strategy and methods of learning. I've had a little restructuring here. There is a section that was originally later in the text. So I transferred it into point number 4 in methods. That is, work for longer periods of time. And this section is, I generally think that the trend of... Oh, by the way, this expands on this last sentence that I had here. This exercise also gains a lot of effectiveness if done without the use of any technology, even for someone who wouldn't use it for anything other than work. So, expanding on that, I generally think that the trend of getting off technology that has emerged a couple of years ago was overblown. People sometimes claim that working without external distraction is a revolution, but unfortunately, the blind and cruel technology-addicted world doesn't allow them to use their full potential. We're about a minute into the podcast, which is the perfect moment to mention Cal Newport's deep work. And this is kind of his point of view also. He talks about distractions and technology a lot and how we should mitigate those distractions and get off technology. I think he overemphasizes that point. It seems like he thinks that would just solve all the problems and we would be able to reach our full potential, but the problem is much larger than that. Partially because if we cut off all the external stimuli, all the external distractions, then we're still stuck with the biggest distraction out of all of them, which is just our thoughts, our internal distractions. And that is a real problem. And so I think Cal Newport overemphasizes getting off technology and the influence of external distractions on our work. I think that just the problem is much larger than that. That can easily be debunked. That I just said that basically by simply pointing out that if you simply get rid of external distractions, then you still will be left with the distractions generated inside your head, which are often much stronger. Fighting against distraction is a lost cause, so you need to make your work seem important enough that those distractions will lose any value by comparison and will not be worth thinking about at all. But having said that, distraction-free periods are a useful tool to have at your disposal at certain situations. Perhaps surprisingly, or perhaps not, they actually work best for days off. It's a great feeling waking up in the morning knowing that the day revolves only around you. It's not only that you can't browse the internet, it's not really that you can't browse the internet, it's more that you don't have to do it. You can just focus on something that you really want to do. Keep in mind that I didn't say technology-free days. So you can wake up and watch a film or play a video game. You can define distraction-free however you want. In principle, it means only doing just one thing and nothing else. Of course, browsing the internet is by its nature a process that almost requires going from one thing to another, but watching a film, especially if it's on a CD, isn't. So then watching YouTube, for example, is somewhere in the middle. If you plan on watching just one long video or playlist, then in theory that is distraction free. But the biggest distraction of the internet is that you can spend hours going from one thing to another, looking for something to commit to and never actually getting to it. Similarly, if you're watching films on Netflix, then you can spend a lot of time deciding what to watch next. Even if you plan out exactly what to watch, if in the back of your mind you know that you can change that plan at any moment. Distraction-free periods can be used not only with long work. They are also certainly almost necessary for any kind of deep work and useful for just about anything that doesn't benefit from the use of technology. If something does in fact benefit from it, then don't try to force it to become independent from technology. So that was expanding on point number 4, work for prolonged periods of time, but it applies also to point number 1, or actually point number 2, which was learn intensity, then prolong the time. So it works, of course, for long work and intense work and just regular work. It doesn't really have to be an exercise. You don't have to do this distraction. You don't have to have this distraction-free period just to help you in an exercise in your training. You can just do it because it works, and it's just a distraction-free period. If you feel like it helps, then go for it. So method number 4 is lose any sense of time. Disable the clock on the menu bar on your computer. Don't check your phone. Don't have anything planned like a meal or going to bed in a while. So this is of course best done when trying to lose weight. And if you do have something planned, then have an alarm for it and just lose yourself in the work until you hear the alarm. This will eliminate any thoughts that maybe you should be doing something else. And when you eliminate them, the rest is simple. You keep working until you drop. You should delegate the maximum time that could be required to it in your schedule. It's then useful to have some other things that could be done if you do finish the task or if you just feel like that's enough. That other task ideally should be either vastly different, perhaps something artistic, or something like a chore in nature. Something that can be just pushed through where quality doesn't come into play. Editing a video where the process is clearly laid out would be a good idea. So would be actual chores like cleaning your house or washing dishes. But either way, lay out clearly what specific task will you do during that time when you're planning this whole undertaking. This method works with tasks that can be fully engrossing. Writing code or writing in general is probably best for that, whereas for reading a boring textbook, it might not work at all. So I think this mostly relates to episode number 1. So everything is connected. When I said that Elon Musk had those trance-like states, and he could go for hours doing just one thing. And also, I mentioned that Bill Gates also had those same moments. Like, for example, solving jigsaw puzzles. He would just sit on it until he was done with barely any breaks at all. So this is kind of trying to replicate that. And it's actually very useful. This whole disabling the clock and just not paying any attention to time is very useful. It seems like that shouldn't play such a big role that if you work for say an hour, you're going to be tired anyway, and you're going to know that you've worked for an hour. But if you really disable the clock and not pay any attention to the time that you've worked, then what you're going to realize is that often after say an hour of working, we feel like we should be tired by this point. So we kind of force that tiredness onto ourselves. Even if we just kept going, we would be fine, and our performance may drop slightly, but we can still keep going. It's not that significant. So it's a very useful method to get more done, and it also changes your mindset, that you're there to do something, and you just don't care about anything else. You're just there. You just work until you drop, and that's the only thing that matters. And if you drop, then okay, you can go to bed, and then the next day you can do something different. But for now, this is the only thing that matters, and that's a really powerful realization, or a powerful mindset to have at that moment. So method number 6 is again something I've mentioned. Again, everything is connected. Method number 6 is read. The importance of reading cannot be understated. It's a magical tool that in theory doesn't seem to be much better than, for example, watching documentaries and good movies. But in practice, it produces improvement in many areas. Perhaps it's because it's more deliberate. One of the effects we're most interested in is the improvement of the ability to focus. Reading requires sustaining a pretty high level of focus for an extended period of time, and itself creates a compelling challenge that makes you want to focus to the best of your ability, because you're interested in the book and basically want to know what's going on. You should read material of a difficulty that allows you to comprehend everything without stopping, but just barely. When you get better, you can also start reading very difficult material like poetry, but treat it differently. Don't try to speed read it. Basically, like when you're reading poetry, for example, of course you have to analyze everything that you read, and you don't do that with a novel. You're just reading it continuously. Not speed reading it basically refers to that continuous reading, basically. So it's not really the speed reading that was very popular a couple of years ago, when you're just looking at words and basically just glancing at them, and that's supposedly, that of course is much faster, but supposedly the comprehension is also the same as in regular reading, but it actually isn't, which is something I've talked about with relation to point number 3, which is so speed reading. Actual speed reading can be used for that method 3, that getting into the groove. But what I mean here is continuous reading should be treated differently than something that requires also analysis, like poetry. Tim Ferriss has probably the best resource on how to learn to read faster with full comprehension, and it's called Scientific Speed Reading. And it actually isn't speed reading because it works. It's just a structure that you can apply to your regular reading, and it's a good structure. It's pretty much what you would expect, kind of, but it's told explicitly. So you're not just trying to learn from experience, but really just by practice, but really have no structure for that. He's actually telling you methods. He's actually giving you a structure that you can apply. And it's a very natural structure, but again, it's a structure that can be applied. And that way you will quickly be able to see the results and know what is proper reading and how to read properly, other than just reading quickly and with comprehension. Reading will also help you cultivate your motivation, and you can read much faster than someone can talk. Of course, you can speed up the video, but still there is something about reading that is just like nothing else when it comes to forming great minds. Like, for example, Elon Musk. And I've mentioned Cal Newport in this episode. I think on average I might be mentioning him twice every episode. So there it goes. Another mention of Cal Newport's deep work. Method number 7 is memorize cards. Reading can certainly improve your ability to focus, but it's more of a general mind exercise. Card memorization is probably the best way to train it directly. It has been very well described in Cal Newport's deep work. There are many systems for memorizing a deck of cards on the internet. Most of them are variations of the location, person, action, object system. You start by picking a place, say your childhood homeroom, and going through most important parts of it, say furniture, in an ordered fashion, say clockwise. Each card has a person associated with it, and an action and object associated with them. So for the first furniture, you imagine a person, which is first card, doing an action from the second card with an object, which is third card, interacting with that part of the chosen place. So that furniture. Then you move on to the next part of this place and start with the fourth card. There is something important to be said, and just by the way, just if you want to really know, really use this method, then I recommend just going on the internet and searching for card memorization. I believe it's called Grand Memory Champion or something. It's basically like or Grand Memory Master, something like that. It's a title given to those who can perform, I think, one of 3 feats, and one of them is memorizing a deck of cards in less than 2 minutes. So that's the goal we're trying to reach. And on the internet, you can find a lot of tutorials that tell you exactly what system you can use, how to use it, and you can easily apply that. Simply apply that in a simple way, because it's actually not easy. The application is difficult, which is something that I write about here also. There is something important to be said about this method. It won't work immediately. At first, you're mostly going to try to remember what's associated with a certain card. That's also hard and uneventful enough that your mind might easily start to wander. You shouldn't be surprised if after a week of practice, 1 hour every day with a half full deck, your best time is 20 minutes. And then reciting the cards could take even longer. But I believe it is worth it to keep going. Just don't be discouraged if you see no improvement in your concentration at first. Really, it will start working when you get under about 5 minutes with a full deck. And even then, it will take you probably 12 minutes with recitation, plus some time for shuffling, etc. So, in half an hour, you will be able to do this exercise only twice. And half an hour is a long time. Only when you get to 2 minutes, so 5 minutes with recitation, up to 5 times in half an hour, which is a good amount, you will be able to really reap full benefits out of this exercise, and you will be focused all throughout. When you first starting out, it will be difficult, but make sure that you get through that phase as quickly as possible. Have something assigned to every card instead of doing, say, just half a deck, just for starters, and then expanding that. I recommend just picking something for every card from the beginning, and just doing everything right from the get-go, and use techniques that allow you to achieve best results from the beginning. For example, lay out all of your cards on the table to easily be able to jump from one to the next, instead of having the whole deck and taking one card and turning it over. So the way I use card memorization is I alternate between reading and card memorization on say about a weekly basis. So I'm going to read before bed for 1 week, and then another week before bed I'm going to do card memorization. Something like this. I feel like this works better than trying to do them simultaneously every day. And method number 8 is write code. Programming is an excellent way to learn the basics of thinking. It has a low skill floor and high skill ceiling. And it's much more basic than other types of thinking. It's based on very simple principles. Compare that to real life decision making, when it's often best to make a gut decision. Even if it's not the best approach off the bat, all problems can be broken down into smaller, simple problems. The ability to break down problems is very useful. In intellectual work, the number one problem is figuring out what to do. Besides that, you have to tell the computer precisely what you want it to do, which will teach you to be more intentional and not be satisfied with a hand-waving answer. Writing code is undoubtedly intellectual work. It's almost purely intellectual work, and it's different from just studying, and it's hard. So that clearly makes it a very useful exercise for your mind, for any kind of intellectual work. So those were the methods, and now the last part is application, or putting it all together. This is, like I said, this was pretty fun, like I said, because I've written all this strategy and methods, and now it seemed really like something you say but don't execute. So now this application is a really neat way to apply those methods and this strategy into your week, into your planning, and into your work. And it makes it really easy. So it's difficult to remember and use these principles in your day-to-day life, but you can plan your week in a manner that uses them so that during that day you can just follow the plan. I use Google Calendar to plan my week. I set aside some time on Sunday for weekly planning. During the week, I just adjust my plans according to how the situation has changed, if need be. First, you should set up your planned events: classes, your job, sleep, evening and morning routines. I also set up time for reading and gym, but you might not have the luxury. But you might not have that luxury, and instead will have to find some time to fit them somewhere between your work instead of the other way around. Most of those events are going to be recurring, so you can set them up to repeat accordingly. Now you need to figure out what goals you want to accomplish that week and set aside some time to work towards them. I usually have 1 or 2 priorities, like university plus a hobby. They should be oriented towards a big goal. So university means, for example, getting a certain average grade for the semester. And hobby is, for example, hobby, which, for example, can be recording this podcast, can be, for example, getting featured on a certain list of best podcasts. And each week, choose goals related to those priorities. For example, doing all your work this week, doing all your homework this week is a goal that will help you reach the goal of getting a certain average grade and delivering one podcast episode every week will of course help you get featured on a list of best podcasts. This is also where you can set a goal for the amount of time you want to work during a day or week, which is method number 1, count the time worked. Now this is where the methods described above come into play. You can use those methods to decide how you want to get those activities done. You can use an activity that brings you closer to a certain goal to also train your mind. Use a list to assign a certain style of work to appropriate activities. There are 3 basic styles which relate to those methods. So the first style is intense work, relating of course to learn to work intensely or work intensely, then prolong the time. Learn intensity, then prolong the time. And that means basically that you work for a certain amount of time as intensely as possible. So say 20 minutes, then 5 minutes, then a 5-minute break, then 20 minutes again. Long work for prolonged periods of time. It means set aside a certain long period of time and work on something with minimal breaks until time is up. You will see the biggest benefits from doing it for at least 6 hours while trying to get, say, 5 hours of actual work done. And the last style is untimed work, which is method lose any sense of time. Set aside a long period of time to work on something without checking the amount of time worked or what time it is. Work on it for as long as you feel like, probably a couple of hours. For example, if you need to learn for the exam and the exam consists of a test and problems to solve, then you might set aside some time to go through the lecture notes and try to understand everything one by one, which is long work. Then you might want to also set aside some time in the morning, for example, to try to understand those concepts that you're really struggling with. And you can use intense work here. You also need to prepare for the problems by doing extra homework. As long as you're not intentionally trying to distract yourself by, for example, watching YouTube while solving problems, then you can't really force yourself to solve them more intensely. So solving homework problems is nice because you can actually, it's one of those activities when you actually can listen to music, maybe even podcasts, although that's stretching it. I would limit myself to music and still get almost the same amount of time, the same amount of work done. It really isn't that much of a distraction when you're doing homework. So you can just work on them for as long as you wish, untimed work, and later probably also long work to force yourself to think in focused mode on the remaining problems that you have no idea how to solve. When assigning tasks, you should also consider if some of them would be better done with no use of technology of any kind, which is point number or method number 4, number 5, I believe. Wait, no. Is it? It is. No, wait. No, that's not. That's not it. That's what I added to method number 3, which was long work, and I added a note on setting up distraction-free periods. So let's continue. Not everything has to fit in with those 4 styles of work. Not everything has to be training. Only use for training those activities that really fit and can benefit from a certain style of work. Those methods of approaching work are really difficult, so you have to commit to them fully. Most of your work should still be what you've been doing before. Slowly going through lecture notes or reviewing the problems you did in class. You can say that those are trivial things and that you'd be better off doing really hard work instead of focusing intensely on something for just 3 hours a day, or spending a whole day studying for a test and being done with it afterwards, but you'd be dead wrong. That's why you need to work so much. There are always important things to be done. The 80-20 rule can easily be misunderstood in this case. When you're spending long days studying, you're in fact still staying below the 20% of effort required to pass. Usually, when you try to apply the 80-20 rule to studying, you end up getting 80% of results, but on the actual test, but not on the actual test. You end up getting 80% of the results, but that's not the 80% on the test. That's 80% of getting a vague idea of what the concepts you're learning about refer to. Usually, what they ask you to do for class is already 20% of the effort to get 80% of the results. So that's, if you do everything in class, then that's like 80%, and you have to do extra to do this 100%. So if you do only 20% of this 20% that you're doing in class, of this 20% of work required to fully understand this subject, which is what you do in class, then you're going to end up with 80% of effort. So that would be like 60%. So that's okay. That you will pass, maybe, probably. Depends on your university. 64% usually passes, but it depends. But it's not that great. It's not 80%. It's far from 80%. So I wanted to include here a graph. I will link this document in the description, of course, so we can go and look at the graph in the document. Basically, what I wanted to show was that people, when talking about the 80-20 rule, they don't consider usually the end goal. they think it's obvious, but it isn't. So they end up confusing this end goal, the absolute end goal. So in terms of studying, it would be understanding just absolutely everything on this subject, and that requires years and even lifetimes. They think that you can just take that if you take 20% of the work that you're doing, then you're going to get 80% of the understanding of this entire subject. Well, of course, that isn't the case, because 20% of understanding the entire thing is already like tens of years. And in fact, the amount of work that they think is 20% is only 20% of just getting a vague idea of what this whole subject is about. So that's really nothing. It's 20%. This 20% of work will get you 80% of getting a very vague idea of what this subject is about. So that's not what we're looking for. And usually, of course, this Pareto rule, this 80-20 rule, this Pareto distribution, it works pretty well, but it's very difficult to understand how it works exactly. And so it's better to just assume that you're not working enough, and that you need to be working more to do well. And aside from that, you might be just attending university to get the 80% of what you can learn from university. But this whole document, of course, isn't really for that kind of person. If you're here, then you want to absolutely crush it. So you want basically 100% of the results. You want to be really exceptional at it. So you need to put a lot of effort, much more than you would think. And it turns out that that's 20% of something, of the work required to understand this subject fully, but it's much more than what you would think that 20% that would be required to understand this subject fully is. So you just forget about this rule. In this context, it's not useful, and it's better to just work really, really hard. After that, you can add priming before important activities. I personally use it 3 to 4 times per week. Reading, card memorization, coding, as well as activities for your creative period. And here I'm referring to the split between the analytical and the analytical or focused, and the creative or diffused part of the day from strategy 6, which is don't do 2 things that compete for your attention. That split of the day between the analytical and the creative part isn't necessary. Um, and sometimes it's better to not do that and just focus on one thing and do one thing for the entire day. And then move on to the next thing and do that next thing for the whole another day. But if you do that, if you do split your day in two, this is the way to do it. This is the moment to do it. You should also set aside time to cultivate your motivation. You can choose from, among others, researching the advances in your field and future prospects, watching videos related to your work, playing video games that get you motivated to do your work, etc. Besides that, you need to remember to cultivate your motivation in your day-to-day life by choosing the right books to read, the right blogs to read, etc. It's also important to mention that cultivating your motivation doesn't only have to relate directly to work. You will also feel more motivated if you clean your room, think about your future and make big plans, or even go buy small clothing or go buy new smart clothing. These are actually often more important than the things that directly relate to your work. But there is an obvious problem that they don't directly relate to your work. So use them and use them a lot, but remember that you cannot rely on them alone. You don't always have the luxury to have this period to cultivate motivation, but you should try to do it as often as possible. I mean that there are periods in your life when you can relax a little and think more strategically, and then there are times when you just have to work all day without a break. I usually have this period on Sundays, but on a Sunday before an exam, a week before an exam, I sit down for the entire day to study. And this is, I don't remember where I've heard this idea, but this is the idea that you split your life between your vacation, I guess, and your harvest season. So when it's time to harvest, you just go into the field and work for as long as you can, all day, every day, basically. And then when you're done, when it's time to relax, you just relax and return to normal, enjoy your life, and prepare for the next harvest season. And that's I really like that idea. I think it's a really useful way to look at life. It's certainly much better than trying to have some sort of work-life balance, which in my opinion is just impossible and you shouldn't even attempt to do it. This idea of having harvest seasons is, in my opinion, much better. So that takes care of all the methods. Now let's get into applying the strategy. Some of those points are difficult to apply. Let's go through a list. So rule number 1, work a lot, which is just choosing a goal for a number of hours worked. That can be applied easily. Cultivate your motivation is rule number 2, which is just put aside time for reading motivational material, long-term planning, etc. And then we have 3 rules that are difficult to apply. Let's just leave them for now. Rule number 6, don't do two things that compete for your attention. Proper planning, for example, dividing your day in two or your week in three. So, for example, you can work 3 days on one thing, then 2 days on another, and then 2 days on the first thing again. Which is how I said Elon Musk splits his schedule. He works at SpaceX for 2.5 days, then 2.5 days at Tesla, or something like that, and then 2 days at Tesla, but that would be the entire week. No, the last one is SpaceX. So 2.5 at SpaceX, 2.5 at Tesla, and 2 days at SpaceX. That would be the entire week. So that's actually probably how he works nowadays. But I believe in episode 1 I said that he works on like 1.5 days at SpaceX, then 1.5 at Tesla, and then 2 days at SpaceX, and then he has the weekend off. Something like that. So that's also one of the splits that you can use instead of relying on just dividing your days in two. So this analytical and creative part, whatever works for you. And for the tasks you have, of course, because there might be tasks that require a lot of time, and they shouldn't be split into. You just need the whole day to do them. So then, of course, you shouldn't split your day in two. So rule number 7, do your work, but also train to get better at your work. And this gets applied by applying methods. So that leaves us with rules 3 through 5, which are more philosophical in nature. So rule 3 is accept difficulties as they are. Rule 4, win at everything and keep your momentum. Rule 5, instead of trying to figure out what to do, find something that you can do and do it. While they certainly can and should be applied as much as possible while planning, there is no doubt that you must also simply keep them in mind while doing your actual work. Keep in mind that the way to apply those principles described above does not cover the entire philosophy that is captured in this manual. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written so many pages of it. You need to come back to read those principles again from time to time to remember the idea that stood behind all of them. This will also motivate you to use them and remind you what benefits they have. So that was the entire manual. I have some extra tips and insight, but I don't think I will be covering them on this podcast. You can just go to the description. I will post a link to this document, and you can read those extra tips and insight. I might actually refer to them in some form in later episodes, but I will not go through them explicitly just as they are. I will not read them. So that was, I think it was 4 episodes of this document, and basically it's done. I need to go through it once again just to check if there are any mistakes, which there are, of course. I need to make sure that everything is correct and just fix some small things. But overall, the document is nearly finished, and the version you're going to see in the description when you see it is going to link to the finished document. So for the next episode, we'll be doing something entirely different, and this has been episode 6 of the Intellectual Work podcast, and thank you for listening.